True Story Media.
The holidays mean more travel, more shopping, more time online, and more personal info in more places that could expose you more to identity theft. But LifeLock monitors millions of data points per second. If your identity is stolen, our US-based restoration specialists will fix it, guaranteed, or your money back. Don't face drained accounts, fraudulent loans, or financial losses alone. Get more holiday fun and less holiday worry with LifeLock. Save up to 40% your first year. Visit lifelock.com/podcast. Terms apply.
This podcast contains adult themes and language, and some of the things that we discuss may be disturbing to some listeners. In this podcast, we discuss sexual assault, torture, race, and murder. Listener discretion is advised. Please take care of yourself.
Welcome to Fruitloops, Buiti Binafi, and bienvenidos bitches. Thank you so much for listening. Fruitloops is a true crime, history, and comedy podcast that delves into the often overlooked stories of serial killers of color and, more importantly, the victims. We take deep dives into the lives and crimes of these killers worldwide, while also examining the history, culture, and social factors that may have influenced their actions. And the reason that we cover these crimes is because they often go unnoticed by the public. And why is that? Because in the simplest of terms, the news is racist. Allegedly.
And we are Wendy and Beth. She's Wendy, a Black Latinx woman, and I'm Beth, and I just happen to be white. That's just a little piece of who we are. Another piece is that although we are both fascinated by true crime, really fascinated by true crime, and we know a lot about it, keep in mind that we are not journalists, investigators, or psychologists, and the opinions expressed in this podcast are just that, our opinions.
Beth, remind us, who is our subject today?
This is an unsolved case, which is not something we usually do, but we thought it would be fun for Christmas to do something a little different. Today we are covering the case of the Austin axe murder, which some people call America's Jack the Ripper.
Ooh, uh-oh. I don't have any scary sound effects, but let's just hop into the stats and you'll see, you guys, this really creeped me out. Okay, here we go. Stats time. All right, today's subject, name unknown. He or she, we believe it's a he, had 8 known victims. Molly Smith was 25. Walter Spencer was attacked but not murdered, just seriously wounded. Clara Strand and Christine Martinson were 2 Swedish servant girls who were seriously wounded. Eliza Shelley, Irene Cross, I don't have more information about them, I apologize. Clara Dick was someone who was seriously wounded. Mary Ramey, 11 years old, was murdered, and her mother, Rebecca Ramey, was seriously wounded. Gracie Vance and her boyfriend, Orange Washington, were both murdered. Susan Hancock was a woman who was murdered on Christmas Eve, and Eula Phillips was also murdered on Christmas Eve, and her husband, James Phillips, was seriously wounded. Did you want to divide this up, or you want me to keep going?
Oh, no, go. You can keep going.
Oh, okay.
I just threw these in there for you to read.
Oh, bless your, again. It's like if life was a video game and you got gold coins or points, and the the final level was heaven. Everything you do, I just hear like cha-ching. She's on to the next level. Here she is, close to heaven. Let's see. Okay. Moving along, the Austin axe murderer, aka the Axe Man of Austin, and aka the Servant Girl Annihilator. This aka originated from the writer O. Henry, the guy who wrote The Gift of Magi, a Christmas story in which a wife sells her hair to buy her husband a Christmas present. Platinum watch chain for his prized pocket watch. But as it turns out, the husband sold his pocket watch to buy his wife a present ornamental combs for her hair. Isn't that sad? O. Henry actually lived in Austin under his real name, William Sidney Porter. In 1885, he wrote to a friend that the town is fearfully dull except for the frequent raids of the servant girl annihilators who make things lively in the dead of night. Here's something I found out while researching this case. O. Henry was not only a writer, but he was also a bank teller in Austin who spent more than 3 years in a federal penitentiary for embezzlement. He started writing while he was in prison. The more you know. Boom, boom,
Wow.
boom, boom. That theme song. By the way, speaking of Dead of Night, and part of my research in this case was listening to, some podcasts about it, and 99% Invisible did an episode about this case and talked about how there were no street lights at the time and how easy it was for people to things to happen in the dead of
Look
night.
around in the dark.
Hard for us to consider now. Anyway, 8 people were killed, 6 black people and 2 white people, all attacked in the middle of the night, several of them with an axe. The Annihilators' victims were mostly young black women who worked as domestic servants. They were attacked indoors while asleep in their beds, but 5 of them were dragged outside. The Annihilator also raped and mutilated his victims, and he would also attack anyone who was present during the murders, including the victims' friends, boyfriends, and husbands. The murders took place over a year, from December 1884 to December 1885, and they just stopped. Poof, done. And the perpetrator was never caught. So now we're going to dive into the setting. Take us there, Beth.
Austin, Texas is located along the north bank of the Colorado River. Evidence of habitation in the Balcones Escarpment region of Texas, a fault line that runs from Dallas down through Austin and into San Antonio, can be traced to at least 11,000 years ago. 2 of the oldest Paleolithic archaeological sites in Texas, the Levi Rock Shelter and the Smith Rock Shelter, are located southwest and southeast of present-day Austin, respectively.
For hundreds of years, nomadic tribes of Tonkawas, Comanches, Lipan Apaches, and others camped, fished, and hunted along the creeks nearby. In the late 1700s, the Spanish set up temporary missions in the area. You know where this is going. People of African descent were part of the population that settled in Texas in the 17th and 18th centuries. This population included free and enslaved Black and mixed-race people, as interracial marriage was legal and very common.
The enslaved population was afforded some rights under Spanish rule, including the right to purchase freedom, protest against abuse, or obtain new masters if they were being treated unfairly. Though African people occupied the lower end of the castas, a racial categorization system of Spanish Texas, some African and mixed-race people were able to ascend the classification system by gaining wealth and prestige through labor.
Following Mexican independence in 1821, the Mexican government adopted policies to gradually outlaw enslavement in the newly established country, but Anglo settlers actively worked to ensure slavery was preserved in Texas.
A number of enslaved African Americans arrived with Stephen F. Austin and his Anglo settlers in 1824. By the end of 1825, there were around 443 slaves in the colony, almost a quarter of its population. By the time that clashes with the Mexican government led to the Texas Revolution in 1835, more than 5,000 enslaved people lived in Texas.
Wow. The Texas Constitution of 1836 gave more protection to slaveholders while further controlling the lives of enslaved people through new slave codes. The Texas legislature passed increasingly restrictive laws governing the lives of free blacks, including a law banishing all free black people from the Republic of Texas.
Texas's enslaved population grew rapidly. While there were 30,000 enslaved people in Texas in 1845, the census lists 58,161 enslaved African Americans in 1850. The number had increased to 182,566 by 1860.
That is quite a jump.
That is a lot.
And welcome to Culture Corner. At some point in the mid 1800 something, the transatlantic slave trade ended. England was like, this is dumb. We don't need this anymore. Spain was like, we're moving on. And the United States was like, but we still need Africans. So they started breeding Black people. And at one point in our nation's history, before slavery was abolished, Virginia's like number one export was enslaved people.
Oh my God.
And so that is, I think, the growth of the population had to do with that was by
Breeding.
design. Yeah, by breeding. So anyway, when the first permanent Anglo settlers arrived in the Austin area, they named the village Waterloo. In 1839, the capital of the new Republic of Texas was moved from Houston to Waterloo. A new city was then built and named after Stephen F. Austin, the father of Texas. Judge Edwin Waller, who was later to become the city's first mayor, surveyed the site and laid out a street plan that remains largely intact today.
Waller surveyed a grid plan on a single square mile plot with 14 blocks running in both directions. One Grand Avenue, which Lamar named Congress, cut through the center of town from Capitol Square down to the Colorado River.
In October 1839, the entire government of the Republic arrived from Houston in ox carts. By the next January, the town population was about 856 people. At this time, Austin was, in the words of writer Skip Hollandsworth, a rustic cow town with cattle and hogs running wild in the streets.
The new town plan included a hilltop site for a Capitol building looking down towards the Colorado River from the head of Congress Avenue. The avenue, which is what they called it, and Pecan Street, now 6th Street, have remained Austin's principal business streets ever since.
By the way, have you ever been to Austin?
I have not.
Oh, it's a neat little city.
I hear it's nice.
Yeah, it is nice. On February 23rd, 1861, Texans voted to secede from the Union and join the Confederate States of America. Because Texas remained relatively unscathed by fighting during the war, life for enslaved African Americans continued in much the same way as it had before the fighting.
On June 19th, 1865, at the end of the Civil War and over 2 years after President Lincoln issued the Emancipation Proclamation, General Gordon Granger landed in Galveston and declared that enslavement had ended. However, many Black people in Texas remained enslaved for months, and in many parts of Texas for years, when their owners refused to release them. Many newly emancipated people celebrated their independence at the holiday subsequently known as Juneteenth, and it's a holiday that Black American people celebrate to this day.
Hell yeah, one of the best holidays of the year, Juneteenth. Get my red drink, get all the fixins. Woo-wee. Yeah. But unfortunately, Juneteenth this year was virtual. Maybe next year. Yeah. After the Civil War, millions were freed from slavery. They were without homes or steady work. Their families had been torn apart by the domestic slave trade. White Southerners saw this as Black vagrancy and believed it to be a sudden and dangerous problem. They also saw a sudden drop in their labor force and their profits, particularly in cotton, and they were freaking out. Freed Black people immediately were able to work less because we're not slaves anymore. Thank God. And so they took it upon themselves to work less because they had that right. They
didn't have to work all the goddamn time.
Sun up to sundown. Get out of here with that shit. They reduced their Saturday work hours, and many Black women, how dare they, were now able to spend more time with their own children instead of for caring for and breastfeeding, their master's white kids.
Rude.
Mm-hmm. The audacity. So uppity.
The audacity, yeah. Black codes were instated by an all-white state constitutional Congress in 1866 to regulate the behavior and movement of Black people in white society, which severely limited Black people's rights. These Black codes included labor, vagrancy, and apprenticeships laws that were meant to mimic the conditions of enslavement. The laws were said to be applicable regardless of race, but in actuality, they only applied to Black people.
Kind of sounds...
Surprise!
Yeah. Where have I heard that before? Oh, 2020. That's where I heard it. Also, I was looking for because these laws are really ridiculous. I'll get into it in this. Here we go. Black people caught violating any of the ridiculous laws would be rounded up by authorities and placed in contract work, forced apprenticeships, or convict leasing situations. White Texans reacting to the end of the Civil War increased violence and attacks against African Americans. And these black codes or these black laws, every state had different ones. I think most of them modeled theirs off of South Carolina's, which were the most harsh. But there's so many of them, and they're so stupid. Yeah, I was just looking for one like really silly one, and I couldn't find one. But if any of you guys are listening, come across like just a ridiculous, like something stupid, like you can't cross the street at the same time as a white lady, or you're going to like it's just dumb stuff like that. Anyway.
Yeah. The Ku Klux Klan was present in Texas by 1868. 9 years later, in 1877, Reconstruction failed because radical Republican legislation ultimately failed to protect former slaves from white persecution and failed to implement fundamental changes to the social fabric of the South.
In addition, white Texans utilized violence, intimidation, and legal means to limit black suffrage and passed a poll tax in 1902 to restrict the political participation of poor people of all races. There was also the white primary, which restricted voting in primary elections to white Texans only.
Ugh, ridiculous. Newly freed African Americans, most of whom had few resources with which to start their new lives, found themselves increasingly limited by the legacies of enslavement. Many were forced to sign sharecropping contracts with their former owners, while others were incarcerated at rapid rates. Despite these difficulties, African Americans began constructing new forms of family and kinship ties while making gains in literacy and education.
Ha, 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 ha. Staying alive. I don't know. I heard those words come out of your mouth, and I was like, like almost glory tear, but smiling because look at us, continuing to, just one foot in front of the other, keep it going. In spite of everything. The 1870s brought dramatic changes to Austin. In the downtown area, the wooden wagon yards and saloons of the 1850s and 60s began to be replaced by more solid masonry structures. And on December 25th, 1871, Austin became the westernmost railroad terminus in Texas and the only railroad town for many miles. This transformed Austin into a trading center. Construction boomed and the population more than doubled in 5 years to 10,363.
By 1875, there were 757 inhabitants from Germany, 297 from Mexico, 215 from Ireland, and 138 from Sweden. For the first time, a Mexican-American community took root in Austin, in a neighborhood near the mouth of Shoal Creek. Accompanying these dramatic changes were civic improvements, among them gas street lamps in 1874, the first streetcar line in 1875, and the first elevated bridge across the Colorado River about 1876. There were restaurants, an opera house, an ice cream parlor, hotels, and telephone lines.
Doesn't that sound neat?
It does. How exciting that would be. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I wouldn't want to personally go back there, but it sounds nice. Again, black people don't fucks with time travel. Like when you ask a black person, like, hey, what don't you wish you could be born in a different decade? No black person will answer yes. They will always say, I am I'm fine right here and looking forward to tomorrow or like 10 years from now. But back in the 18 whatevers, miss me with that. No, thank you. But it does sound nice on paper. Anyway, by the 1880s, Austin was becoming an actual city, not just a cow town. On September 6th, 1881, Austin was chosen from the site of the new University of Texas. Efforts to place the university in Austin did face some opposition, however. Parents were warned that sending their sons to school so close to lawmakers would be a terrible influence on their morals. Interesting. That's really interesting. Isn't that? So they're afraid of the elites?
Politicians, I think.
Okay. Interesting.
That's how I took it.
Oh, okay. Like it just sounds like I don't want you going to school with those coastal elites, except they're in Texas.
Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah. Okay.
But in 1882, construction began and the university held classes for the first time in 1883. St. Edward's College, which catered to Irish Catholic immigrants, was also built in Austin, as was the Tillotson Collegiate and Normal Institute for Black students. Some called the city the, quote, Athens of the West, unquote.
That sounds really nice. However, laws requiring segregation of railroad cars, waiting rooms, restrooms, restaurants, entertainment establishments, and residential neighborhoods restricted African American mobility and advancement during the late 19th and early 20th centuries.
The Ku Klux Klan continued to enact violence and terror on Texas African Americans, and lynching became an increasingly prevalent form of racial intimidation. Between 1885 and 1942, there were 468 documented victims of lynching in Texas, the vast majority of whom were African American.
Yeah, and I think key word there is documented.
Documented, yeah.
Because, I suspect that number is a lot
There was
higher.
probably more, yeah.
There were Black communities in Austin, Masontown, Wheatsville, and Clarksville. Guytown, located just west of Congress Avenue, was Austin's red light district, which blossomed during the last quarter of the 19th century. The entire area was 8 square blocks. Their clients were city council members, legislators, and businessmen who tacitly supported business in Guytown through their continued patronage. This area was mixed race.
Saloons and beer halls were everywhere. Plus, there was cocaine and opium.
Ooh, hello. Whee! Beth. Oh, man, after the core, here we go.
People complained about it, but the city council turned a blind eye. When one man reported that on a single night he had counted over 100 University of Texas students in Guytown, the city council asked, "What's your point?"
I'm like, what? Yeah, what is the problem?
Guytown was so popular with politicians that the businesses known as, quote, female boarding houses had to hire new, quote unquote, boarders whenever the legislature was in session.
Wow.
And sex workers were referred to as actresses.
Oh,
That's another thing that when I was doing research and I read this, was, back then actresses had really bad reputations.
No,
And
really?
Yeah. Like they may as well have been sex workers. And I wonder if this is why.
Wow. That is so interesting. Look at this, Beth. Wow, what a fascinating fact. Thank you for sharing. Well, in 1884, Austin's economy was booming and the population was at about 23,000. Yet to the rest of the country, Austin was still considered something of a backwater. So now we're going to dive into the timeline. Hit it, Beth.
On December 30th, 1884, 3 years before the Jack the Ripper murders, a black cook named Molly Smith was attacked in her bed. Molly, 25, was born in Virginia in 1857, but was in Texas by the early 1870s. She lived in a small outbuilding behind the home of her employer, William Hall, with her boyfriend, Walter Spencer.
Sometime after midnight on the morning of December 31st, William Hall was awakened by Spencer, who was bleeding profusely from several wounds to the head. He explained to Hall that he had been attacked while he slept. He had been knocked unconscious, and Smith had apparently been taken by the attacker because he could not find her.
Hall went to the outbuilding where Molly lived and found signs of a struggle and a blood-covered axe. He then followed a trail of blood into the backyard where he found Molly Smith lying in the snow. She had died from injuries inflicted by the axe, and she had a gaping hole in her head.
Ooh, sounds horrific. So that was December 30th. Now we're on to the night of March 19th, 1884. Clara Strand and Christine Martinson, two Swedish servant girls that shared living quarters in the same upscale part of town, were seriously wounded when they were shot while walking home. Despite serious wounds, Christine and Clara Strand lived to tell about it, though neither of them had very much to say and could not describe their assailant.
We should say that a lot of articles do not include Clara and Christine's attack as part of the crimes attributed to the axe murderer because they were, one, white, two, they were shot at while walking rather than attacked with an axe in their home. So it was a completely different MO.
Yeah, it is, but it certainly is a good way to throw the authorities off. Now, I'll get to my theories at the end, but
Okay.
Black people were not allowed to have weapons like guns.
Oh, wow.
At
Yeah,
the time.
that I didn't think about that, but yeah.
So that would have just eliminated any Black person.
Right.
But this crime captured the full attention of the authorities and the press because the victims were young, pretty, and white. Newspapers and frightened readers demanded that the police do something. The city marshal, Grooms Lee, described in some articles as lazy and corrupt. Surprise, surprise. Made a show of a modest increase in foot patrols, but did little else to deter or apprehend the perpetrator. He did take credit when the attacks, quote unquote, stopped, but as it turned out, it was just a lull in a killing spree.
Eliza Shelley, 28, was a cook for the family of Dr. Lucien B. Johnson and lived in a cabin located at the back of the home. She lived there with her 3 children, but her husband, William, had been incarcerated earlier in the year for stealing a horse. Eliza was described as, quote, a faithful wife, mother, and employee, unquote.
I also wanted to point out that we are not that far away from the time period of enslavement in America. And Reconstruction is over because of terrorism. And so the only jobs available for women, especially, were as domestic servants. So just wanted it out. On May 8th, 1885, Eliza was discovered by her young children on the floor of the cabin with a gaping axe wound to her right temple. There was also a hole that had been punctured into her skull, in between her eyes, and another deep, round hole above her ear. It was speculated that the killer had stabbed her with an iron bar or with something like a screwdriver. There were also several nice wounds, not nice, Wendy. There were
them are some nice wounds.
No, don't do it, Wendy. There were also some several knife wounds up and down her body.
The killer had broken open a couple of trunks and scattered their contents around the room. Eliza's bloody body had been wrapped in a blanket from the bed, and she had been placed on a quilt taken from one of the trunks. From the way that her body was posed and her nightgown was pulled up, the police thought it was likely that she had been sexually assaulted. Unlike Molly Smith, Eliza had not been taken outside, nor was the murder weapon left behind.
The children were... I got to point something out, too. I feel like I might be spitting out facts and might be getting my timeline confused. Like the Black people not being able to own weapons. I'm not 100% sure if that was the case in Austin, Texas, but I know that it was one of the Black codes. So if we're talking about the same time period, my assumption is it applied in this time, in this place. But don't fact check me on it. The children were too traumatized to give any useful evidence, but footprints of bare feet were found by the cabin. Dr. Johnson was distraught and described Eliza as an excellent woman who they treated as a lesser member of the family. Is that a compliment? And that he didn't know why anyone would want to kill her, particularly in this gruesome manner.
2 weeks later, on May 23rd, a third Black servant, Irene Cross, who was 33, was attacked. Irene was born in Mississippi. By 1870, Irene and her husband Haywood were living in Austin along with their 9-year-old son. By 1880, Irene was widowed. In 1884, Irene lived on Chestnut Street, now 18th Street, with her grown son Washington and an 8-year-old nephew, Douglas Brown.
Irene was found in the backyard of her employer's house after her employer, Robert Wireman, heard screaming and ran outside. Irene's right arm had been almost severed in half, and a long horizontal gash extended across her forehead, as if someone had tried to scalp her.
She was still alive but could not speak. Wireman had her carried inside to a spare bedroom in his house, something that white people thought at the time as an amazing act of generosity.
Mm-mm. Mm-mm. Oh my God. Oh my God.
Irene hung on until May 25th when she finally died.
So as long as I mean, what's the opposite? Like hanging her up for a tree and letting all the blood drain from her body? Like, at least he didn't do that.
Well, I guess because he took her into his house rather than, putting her in her house, I guess. I don't know. But
okay. All right. All right. Now, here's another thing I need to say about people always say, like, have you ever heard a white person say, like, well, if I was alive back then, I would have said something or I would have done something. Right.
Right.
And we all want to be on the right side of history. But
yeah.
I think the right and the wrong is really clear in this, and I think it was really generous of her employer to like let her in the house, but for the mindset of the people to be like, wow, that is
wow, that is amazing.
Wow. Give that guy all of the hip hop air horns. I'm not hitting that button. Don't expect it. Don't hold your breath. I'm just saying, right, there's a right and then there's a wrong and there's a lot of stuff in between. And right. I think it was generous of him. And I think it's weird that people thought that was weird. Anyway, the night Irene was attacked, Washington was not home since he worked nights, but Douglas was. He was one of the few people to see the killer, whom he described as a big, chunky Negro man, barefooted and with his pants rolled up. The killer had covered him with a blanket and told him to be quiet. Douglas had no recollection of the murder, and it is speculated that the killer sedated him with chloroform stolen from a dentist's home.
The killer struck again in August of 1885 when Clara Dick was seriously wounded, but survived the attack. Unfortunately, we don't know much about Clara or this attack, and it's not always included in the stories about this case.
Yeah, I thought that was interesting when because I did my own research too, Beth, even though Beth did probably like 90% of it. Anyway, so when I was doing my research, there were some names on the list that we had already included in our doc, and that were included or not included in other sources, and
different sources. Yeah.
Okay. Well, here we go. Police did not appear to believe that this was the work of one person. Serial murder was not understood at the time. I don't think anybody had even heard of it. After each crime, they arrested boyfriends, husbands, or known acquaintances. Reporting at the time used words like demons, monsters, and fiends, portraying that it was not the work of one person, but of multiple persons. And I gotta say, those nouns are just so sinister that I wonder if my impression was the media was implying that it was a person of color.
Right. Could be.
Could just be my interpretation. Sorry.
Could be. Yeah. I don't know.
I'm sensitive.
The next victim was 11-year-old Mary Ramey. Mary never knew her father, Jacob Ramey, who had died several months before she was born. Her grandmother, Harriet Carrington, and an uncle, Edward H. Carrington, owned the Carrington grocery store on East Pecan Street, now 6th Street, opened in 1872, which was one of the first Black-owned businesses in Austin.
Ooh, that deserves a hip-hop air horn. In the meantime, Beth, say pecan again.
Sorry, pecan. Pecan? Was that pecan?
I would say pecan, but to each his own. I'm sure everybody's got their own little,
pecan.
Say it again. You said pecan. I just
pecan.
Pecan.
East pecan. Pecan.
Say pecan pie. Pecan pie.
Pecan pie.
Oh, that's it.
Pecan pie.
You're off the island. I am voting you off.
Pecan pie. Pecan pie. How do you say it?
Pecan
pie.
It's just so funny. I love the little things you say. I
The
just wanna
little odd
I just wanna put you in like a
things.
little remember in Willy Wonka when Mike TV got shrunk,
Yeah,
like
got
the
all
candy
shrunk.
bar and she put him in her purse? That's what I wanna do to you sometimes. Say it again, Beth. Speak again.
Now I don't know how to say it.
I don't know how you said it before. Rewind the tape. I don't
Okay,
know.
all right.
I don't know. So Pecan Street, got it. And one of the first Black-owned businesses in Austin, which again deserves a hip hop air horn. I'll do it one more time just in case. Now, by the mid 1880s, Mary's mother, Rebecca Ramey, found employment working as a domestic servant at the residence of livery owner Valentine O. Weed on East Cedar Street, now 4th Street. And she and Mary lived on the property.
On August 31st, Valentine Weed was awoken at about 4:30 or 5 in the morning to a strange sound. He went outside to the wash house, opened the door, and found Mary Ramey lying there.
Ooh, now if we were like a super high production show, we would have scary music there, but you're not getting it. Her mother, Rebecca Ramey, had been knocked unconscious while she slept, and Mary had been dragged to the backyard wash house. She'd been raped, and a spike of some kind had been driven into her ear, piercing her brain. Police again found bare footprints.
After the death of her daughter, Rebecca Ramey moved to the East Austin neighborhood of Rosewood, where she lived for the rest of her life with her older daughter, Minnie, and her son-in-law, Lee Green. An 1888 newspaper article stated that Rebecca had, quote, never recovered from the shock and the wounds of that terrible night of blood, unquote.
Not surprising in the least bit.
Yeah.
At this point, people in Austin began freaking the fuck out. Some editorials advised vigilance committees, basically saying that if the police weren't going to protect them, they needed to protect themselves.
In 1885, Austin had a 12-man police force. Woo!
Come again?
And they had little experience with detective investigation or modern police work. 2 of the officers were Black to police the Black communities, but they were not allowed to interrogate or arrest white people.
At the time, the white community thought the murders were the work of Black gangs. Some people thought that because many of the women were living with their boyfriends out of wedlock, that they were targeted for their sinful way of life. The Black community thought that it was the work of demons or some other unholy being.
The police response was, predictably, to round up a bunch of Black men and jail them. Because bare footprints were often found around the bodies of the victims, some Black men were arrested on the suspicion of murder simply because they were not wearing shoes.
Yeah, and I'm assuming my understanding from the like timeline, it's summertime, right? Like August?
Let's see, when was the last murder?
Like it's hot, right? It's Austin?
Yep, August.
So,
yeah.
I mean, and I'm sure shoes were also a luxury, but
they're very expensive back then. Yeah, you wouldn't be wearing shoes in the summer if you didn't have to.
Right? Am I right? Up high.
Yeah.
So, yeah. Anyway, the city also called in some outside detectives who used policing techniques from the old South. This already sounds like a horror movie gone wrong. Some of the jailed men were beaten severely in order to get a confession, and some of them were threatened with lynching. None of the men confessed. Yeah, the ways of the old South. I talked about this last episode. All they had to do was just treat people with respect.
Be nice.
Yeah.
At the same time, bands of armed men began roaming the streets after dark, taking their fear and frustration out on anyone who crossed their path. More often than not, the people who crossed their path were Black men and boys. Many of these men and boys locked themselves in their homes and would not venture out, even for work.
I mean, do you want to stay alive or do you want to get paid?
Yeah,
Understandable. Then came the murders of Gracie Vance, 20, and her boyfriend, Orange Washington, 25. Orange Washington was employed by an Austin builder. The couple lived in a small cabin on the property of William Dunham, Gracie Vance's employer. She was a domestic servant.
On September 28th, 1885, just before 1 a.m., the killer slipped into the cabin through an open window. That night, 4 people were sleeping in the cabin: Patsy Gibson, Lucinda Body, Gracie Vance, and Orange Washington. Gibson and Body did not work for the Dunham family. They were just visitors who had chosen a very bad night to visit their friends.
The Annihilator struck Gibson and Body on their heads with a blackjack or something similar, fracturing both of the women's skulls. But for the other 2, the killer used an axe, which was later found under the blankets of the bed. Within moments, all 4 of them were unconscious.
He then shoved Gracie out the open window, leaving a trail of blood on the sill. He threw the young woman over a fence and dragged her through a weed-filled vacant lot to a stable owned by a neighbor, W.H. Hotchkiss. Investigators came to believe that Gracie must have revived at this point because there were signs of a fierce struggle.
Ooh, that's a lot of bodies in one sitting.
Yeah.
The killer finished by beating her head in with a brick. As in 2 earlier incidents, the victim was wounded above or near both ears and in the temple. She had been raped while she was either dead or dying. She was later found, quote, her head almost beaten into a jelly, end quote. According to a story in the Austin Daily Statesman, Gracie and Orange both died. Patsy Gibson and Lucinda Body survived.
Public outrage grew and the police force was frequently declared ineffectual and incompetent. The city hired Pinkerton detectives, but they too failed to solve the mystery. In December 1885, City Marshal Grooms Lee was replaced by James E. Lucy, an ex-Texas Ranger, and the city police force was expanded in size. New ordinances were enacted by the city council, including a midnight curfew. Late-night sales of liquor were curtailed and vagrants were run out of town.
Remember those vagrancy laws? When I see vagrants run out of town, that leads me to believe that at one point Austin was a sundown town. Do you know what a sundown town is?
Yeah, but remind me.
It is, welcome to Culture Corner with Wendy and Beth. A sundown town is a city or town in the United States where if a Black person or any Black Indigenous person of color is caught in said town after the sun goes down, their life is in danger. You are basically fair game. White people can do whatever they want to you, kill you, mutilate you, kidnap you, rob you, and you could never be heard from again. And I think people think that sundown towns were a thing of the past. We just had the glorious TV show Lovecraft Country, and there was a really epic sundown town scene. But I think there are still sundown towns that exist today.
Yeah.
So anyway, this is how writer Skip Hollandsworth described it in a 2000 article in Texas Monthly. Lucy ordered his troops to, quote, stop strangers and ask them what their business was in town. If the answers were not satisfactory, the strangers were given 24 hours to leave town, spurred on by a $3,000 reward offered by a citizens committee, as well as a $300 reward by the Texas governor. Private detectives and police officers from other cities arrived in Austin in droves. The city was turning into a police state, end quote. And according to an article in the New York Times from 1885, more than 400 men were arrested in connection in this case. And I believe most of them were Black. Am I wrong?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. Susan Hancock, a white woman described by one reporter as, quote, one of the most refined ladies in Austin, unquote.
Whoa.
Married Moses Hancock in about 1868. They had 2 daughters, Lena and Ida. On Christmas Eve, 1885, Lena and Ida Hancock had gone to a Christmas party and were not at home. Susan Hancock was asleep in her daughter's bed when an intruder struck her in the head, knocking her unconscious before carrying her into the backyard. Moses Hancock woke up when he heard a noise and was able to scare the intruder off.
Remember Christmas parties? That's so sad.
Yeah.
No free food, no snacks.
Next year.
Next year, the body of Susan Hancock was discovered by her husband in their backyard, almost exactly where the Four Seasons Hotel stands today. Her head had been split open by an axe. Her left ear was cut through. She had a wound above her left eye. Her cheekbone was cut and her skull was fractured in 2 places. The annihilator had again used a long, sharp instrument to stab her in the ear with such force that the weapon sank 2 inches into her brain.
Yikes.
Susan survived for 3 days, but died on December 28th, 1885.
About an hour after the attack on Susan, Eula Phillips was found dead in the wealthiest neighborhood in the city, near where the Austin Public Library stands today. Eula Phillips was born Eula Burdett on April 22nd, 1868. She married at the age of 14,
Wow.
shortly after the death of her mother, to James Phillips, who was 21 at the time.
Wow, okay. The Phillips family was a very wealthy family from Austin. The couple married in 1883, and their son Thomas was born shortly after. The couple lived with James's parents on Hickory Street, now 8th Street, just west of downtown.
According to a grandniece, Dorothy Larson, the marriage was one of necessity. She said in those days, quote, "If you got a girl pregnant, you married her," unquote. On the surface, Eula appeared to have married well, but Jimmy Phillips was unfortunately an alcoholic with no job who was physically and emotionally abusive.
By the last few months of 1885, Eula and James's marriage was unraveling. Eula started having an affair with 27-year-old John Dickinson. Dickinson was single, attractive, wealthy, and well-connected, and he held the prominent position of Secretary of the Capitol Commission, the agency overseeing the construction of the state capitol building then in progress.
In November of 1885, Eula left her husband, taking her infant son with her. She then spent a week at the residence of Fanny Whipple, a black woman, where she met Dickinson in the evenings. Evidently, Eula did not plan on returning to James because she had Mrs. Whipple fetch her belongings from the Phillips home.
What, she's like 15 by now?
Something like that.
Wow. Oh my goodness. Different times. Eula only stayed at Miss Whipple's a week, then moved into the home of May Tobin, where she spent the following week. Again, seeing Dickinson on several occasions, she then left Mrs. Tobin's and went to stay with relatives in Elgin.
Both Fanny Whipple and May Tobin operated what were called assignation houses, which were private residences in which the owners rented rooms for romantic encounters and provided a certain amount of discretion to their customers. Some of the people who rented the rooms were sex workers. Others were lovers looking for a place to spend time together in private.
May Tobin also did what she called, quote, matchmaking, end quote. If a man was looking for female company, she'd find someone for him. But she did not employ any sex workers. She just made her rooms available to them and introduced people if that's what they were looking for.
While Eula was gone, and at the urging of his mother to straighten up, James Phillips stopped drinking and secured a carpentry job. At the beginning of December, accompanied by his older sister Dorothy Creary, James traveled to Elgin and convinced Eula to come back to Austin. Eula and Thomas then returned to the Phillips home.
On the night of Christmas Eve, after the Phillips household was asleep, Eula slipped out of the house and, accompanied by someone unknown, arrived at May Tobin's, where she had previously spent time with John Dickinson. Eula asked Tobin for a room, but none were available, and Eula left. May did not know who accompanied Eula. They stayed out of view, but she assumed it was a man that Eula wanted to spend time with.
According to Jimmy, that night, the three of them, he, Eula, and Thomas, were sleeping in the same bed. He was attacked, but he didn't remember what happened. He was found in bed, nearly unconscious, a severe gash in the back of his head. Little Thomas was unharmed, but Eula was dragged outside, where she'd been raped and murdered.
Eula was found by following the trail of blood from her bedroom, or the bedroom. Her nude body was in an unlit alley behind the home. Her skull had been bashed in by an axe, and heavy pieces of timber had been placed across her arms, as if to keep her pinned down during the attack.
Blood, blood, blood. Last night's horrible butchery, said the headline in the next day's newspaper, the Austin Daily Statesman. They were so dramatic back then.
I know. See, see what happens when we don't have the internet? You have to just write in bold.
Just start screaming
Yeah,
blood.
Yeah.
During a Christmas Day meeting, more than 500 city and business leaders, lawyers, doctors, and clergymen met to devise a plan to stop the killings.
The city was on the verge of chaos. Many of the same black suspects from a year earlier were rounded up once again, along with a mentally ill Mexican-American man and two suspicious-looking white brothers found with blood on their clothes in a town north of Austin.
The public demanded action and mob violence threatened. All of the efforts to stop the crimes had failed, and the city waited for the next murder to occur. But after December, there were no further mysterious murders. Just as suddenly as the attacks began, they just stopped.
That's wild.
I know.
Yeah. Now we're going to get into the trial or trials. In early December 1885, District Attorney James H. Robertson, the mayor's brother, decided to try Walter Spence, the boyfriend of Molly Smith, the first victim for murder. But after a 2-day trial, Spence was acquitted.
Which is amazing because he was a black man.
Whoa, that's right.
Yeah.
That is amazing. Look at justice. Yeah. I thought I'm like shocked, but that is amazing.
Me too. When I read that, I was like, whoa.
Whoa, yeah. You did like the whole Matrix, like, whoa.
Jimmy Phillips was tried for the murder of his wife, Eula Phillips. His trial has been called the 19th century equivalent of the O.J. Simpson case. Reporters came in from all over the country, from Chicago, St. Louis, and New York to cover the trial.
Ooh, that's interesting. The DA alleged that Eula had been, at best, having multiple sexual affairs behind Jimmy's back, and at worst, doing actual sex work. Eula's friendship with Fanny Whipple, the black woman who owned the assignation house, was brought up at trial, and the fact that she had been to the home of May Tobin earlier in the evening on Christmas Eve, the night she was killed.
Jimmy was portrayed by the prosecution as a violently jealous husband, motivated to murder by Eula's infidelity. They did not connect Eula's murder with the murder of Susan Hancock, which had occurred only an hour before hers and in pretty much the same way.
Eula's sex life was bared for all to see, and she was basically victim blamed. At the trial, Jimmy was quoted as having said that if he ever found out that Eula was cheating on him, he would kill her and then himself.
During the trial, a piece of evidence was brought out, which was a sawed-out plank from the veranda of the house with a bloody footprint on it. Jimmy was made to put his foot in a pan of ink and then stand on a board. The footprint he made in ink was smaller than the bloody footprint.
Also, this happened so long ago, but the whole victim blaming thing is a tale as old as time.
Yeah, it really is, yeah.
Other footprints had been found which had something unusual about the toes. A witness testified about George McCudgeon, one of Eula's alleged lovers. He was asked if George had anything peculiar about his feet, but the witness said that he never noticed anything unusual about George's feet. The jury voted to convict Phillips, but he was later acquitted on appeal.
Charges were also made against Moses Hancock, the husband of Susan Hancock. In court testimony, witnesses stated that Moses was a drunk and an abusive husband who had made threats against his wife.
Susan Hancock's sister, Martha, said that Moses never mistreated Susan except cursing at her when he was drunk, but that Susan was afraid of any drunk man. 16-year-old Lena Hancock defended her father, testifying that Papa always treated Mama kindly and never whipped us girls in our lives.
Susan Hancock had thought about leaving her husband and at one point had written a letter detailing her reason for leaving, which was basically that he was a drunk and she couldn't take it anymore. Susan never went through with her plans to leave Moses, but she kept the letter hidden away. It was found among her belongings after her death and was used as evidence in court.
After the death of his wife, Moses Hancock was his own worst enemy. He was drinking heavily, he was threatening and abusive to his in laws and others. He made up strange stories and accusations related to the murder and talked about leaving the country. But in spite of himself, he was ultimately exonerated of Susan's murder in 1887.
Both men were released from custody and never tried again. For months, there was still talk about various suspects, both black and white, but the crimes remained unsolved.
Well, there are many theories on this case, and we are going to share some of them with you. Some people believe that the Austin killer and Jack the Ripper were the same person. I like this theory. Don't know if I believe it. On November 19th, 1888, the Statesman reported that a Malay cook running on ocean vessels was a suspect in the Jack the Ripper murders. The newspaper reported that a Malay cook had been employed at a small hotel called Pearl House in Austin in 1885.
The cook was named Maurice, Alaska or Lasker. I think in Austin he was known as Maurice, and then there was a Malay cook in London that named Alaska or Lascar. They're not sure, and they think it was the same person.
Oh, okay.
Anyway, known as Maurice in Austin, he told acquaintances that he planned to travel by ship to London and left town in January of 1886, several weeks after the servant girl murders ended.
A strong presumption that the Malay was the murderer of the Austin women was created by the fact that all of them, except 2 or 3, resided in the immediate neighborhood of the Pearl House, according to the Statesman in November 1888.
An author named Shirley Harrison, who wrote a book called Jack the Ripper, The American Connection, also believes that the Annihilator and the Ripper are the same person, though she thinks the perpetrator was not the cook, but was a Liverpool cotton merchant named James Maybrick.
According to her, Maybrick's own purported journals, which include confessions of killing prostitutes as well as a page signed by, quote, Jack the Ripper, Maybrick was in Austin on the dates the Annihilator murders occurred. Maybrick died, likely of arsenic and strychnine. Oh,
Strychnine. Yeah.
I thought that was a rapper's name. I've never seen it spelled that way. Arsenic and strychnine poisoning, possibly administered by his wife in May of 1889, after both series of murders ended.
But unlike Jack the Ripper, who only attacked lone white sex workers in a poor district of London, the Austin killer murdered in different parts of the city, and the women were of different classes and races. He attacked them in their homes, sometimes attacking other people who were present. He wielded an axe, dragged them outside, and sometimes punctured their skulls with a rod-like metal object. As far as I know, he did not keep trophies. Jack the Ripper cut his victims apart with a knife, removing organs, which he sometimes kept as trophies. So in my opinion, these MOs and signatures are completely different.
Look, you're the OG. I'm just going to go with what you say. According to Mark Safrick, an ex-FBI profiler, one man was responsible for all of the murders in Austin. The murderer stunned the victims in some way and then would usually drag them outside where he would be able to do whatever he wanted in the cover of darkness.
He believes that because the first victims and the majority of the victims were black, that the perpetrator was probably also black, and that the perpetrator doesn't have a lot of power or control in his life, so he takes that power back by rendering power and control over someone else's life.
Safrick believes that the killer was a younger man, a strong man, probably in his 20s, because he was able to take on the male victims and drag the women outside through windows and over fences.
By the time the 2 affluent white women were murdered on Christmas Eve, the killer already had a lot of murders under his belt and was becoming emboldened. The killings probably ended because the murderer was stopped somehow. Maybe he moved, was incarcerated, or he died.
Kim Rosmo, an expert in geographic profiling, claims that serial killers create mathematical patterns with their crimes, that most of the time killers live within close proximity to their crimes. He pointed out that although many of the crimes took place in residential areas, they were in close proximity to Guytown, Austin's red light district, which was mixed race.
On the night Susan Hancock and Eula Phillips were murdered, if you look at where the homes are located, between them is May Tobin's house, where Eula had visited earlier that evening. The suggestion is that the killer may have followed her from there. Kim's computer algorithm suggests that the killer lived somewhere around Congress Avenue, possibly in Guytown.
Another theory is that the murderer would take a train into town, commit the. Oh, that's my alarm to get my shit together. Sorry. Another theory is that the murderer would take a train into town, commit the murders, and then leave because the train station is also in the same area near Guytown.
History detectives on PBS did an episode on this story, and they surmised that the murderer was a 19-year-old black man named Nathan Elgin, who was killed by police in 1886 after dragging a woman from a saloon to a nearby house and attacking her. Locals called the police after they heard continuous screams from the house, and Elgin was shot while resisting arrest. And he was missing a little toe from one of his feet.
Whoa. Did not see that episode. Well, you know what? That's all, folk. I'm going to just close my computer now. The case is solved. Well, I guess, you know what? Let's just get into our takeaways and what we think might have made this individual pop off. What do you got, Beth?
Well, I just wanted to say that I find it strange that this story never got as much coverage as the Jack the Ripper murders, since the actual murders were pretty horrific.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, with that cutting them up with an axe and then sticking the metal rod in their heads and through their ears. Awful.
Yeah.
And these women were not sex workers attacked on the street, but they were attacked in their actual bedrooms, sometimes with their men or children lying beside them. So I would think that would garner more attention. But I don't know. This killer also had more victims than Jack the Ripper did. So.
Santa Maria. Are you serious?
Yeah.
I had no idea. Wow.
So I don't know why it didn't get that much attention. Of course, the news is racist.
Yeah.
But there were white women killed, so you would think there would have been more attention paid to it. So I don't know exactly why, but maybe because Jack the Ripper wrote letters to the newspapers.
Okay.
So it was known that it was one man doing the crimes.
Okay.
Whereas, people thought that it was like gangs of Black people doing these crimes.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
you're right. That may be the only difference. I was also going to say, no offense to the media, but it might have also been challenging to cover a crime involving mixed race with so many theories, throughout time. Like how it's in my head, it would be difficult to preserve the enthusiasm and pursuit of a case like that. Like it would, it's just too much. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Too many angles.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
Yeah, you got a point there. It's also weird to me that people didn't think that it was the work of one man, but of gangs. But of course, I'm looking at it with modern eyes and everything that we know today about serial killers.
True.
From what I've read, serial killers are not a new phenomenon, but they just weren't understood back then.
Yeah, I gotta tell you, Beth, I'm going in my into my memory banks, and I'm recalling a conversation I had with you before we ever started this show, and I was like, oh, I don't know what it was, but we're talking about vampires or werewolves, and you were like, it was probably a serial killer, not a werewolf or a vampire. Like people just didn't have the language, and I was like, what?
Yeah,
it's not a new phenomenon, but
right.
Look at our understanding.
Yeah, I think there were attacks on people and they couldn't fathom that another human being would do something like this. So it was werewolves or some kind of a demon or something like that.
Yeah, and that came up even in this case. And isn't that why true crime is so fascinating? Like, how in the world could another human being do this to somebody else? What?
Yeah, the whole punching their heads with a metal rod of some type.
Oh,
really, really weird. Like I think that was something that he needed to do to get off.
Like poke them in the ear, poke the ear thing.
shove a piece of metal into their brain,
Yeah.
which is really weird.
It is very, very much so. And I don't know why I can't get that image out of my head, but I thank you for putting it there. And I am being 100% serious. So, yeah, this was a really interesting case. I'm really glad we got to cover it. I don't know if the guy was white or black.
Right.
It was interesting. I did notice that most of the victims were of the servant class and
Yeah.
you know, black women and the most vulnerable population, but the least valued. And unfortunately, there was no Fruit Loops back then, y'all. So the victims got little news coverage. But even in the immediate aftermath of some of the attacks, the victims got what I perceive to be very little compassion. For example, there was a woman who was killed in the vicinity of her children, and the employer sent in his niece, and she was like horrified by the bloody scene and just ran away and left the kids there. Or I think one of the partners was attacked of one of the women, of the black women, and knocked on the employer's door and was like, "We've been attacked," and he was like, I'll see you in the morning," or something like they just, there was not. I mean, these were human beings living amongst the white people, and
I think that was actually Molly Smith.
Okay.
We didn't get into that whole story, but it was pretty funny.
I'm sorry. I could have added that in, but hey, they just stabbed me in the head. Okay, well, I'll see you in the morning. Like,
we'll check that out in the morning. Go on back to bed.
What the hell? And it just seemed really gross. But evolution comes to my mind with this case on so many levels, right? The evolution of our society, right? Slavery being a recent memory for everybody alive at the time of this story. Evolution of serial killing and the investigation of the same, the evolution of the victims going from black servant girls to white women, or across classes. And you know what has not evolved, though? The hardcore desire to keep white women safe. And it didn't seem like it until that was an element of the story that law enforcement really got their butts in gear.
Took it seriously,
which is unfortunate. One more thing. Sorry, rape. A crime of power, nothing to do with sex. So I was under the impression that it could have been a white guy. Because here's why. This is a theory I needed to share. Sorry, this episode is
that's
so long. I feel like such an asshole. But so rape is a crime of power, and I think that it could have been a white dude, despite this toe thing. But slavery was 20 years before this. And the white population had a really, really hard time, especially in Texas, as we talked about in the setting part, really hard time adjusting to the fact that Black people were no longer enslaved and necessarily below them. And it pissed a lot of white people off and was really, really hard for them to get used to, hence the KKK. And I just in my head pictured a white guy so angry at the new system and the new way society looks, and these Black people getting jobs and walking around wherever they wanted. What the hell? And seeking revenge on the new system in the most and attacking women. What's more vile than raping a woman, right? And so that was my theory, and now I'll shut up and move on. All right, Beth, where can the people find us?
Our website is fruitloopspod.com, and we use Fruit Loops Pod for all of our social media. The footnotes for each episode can be found on our website. Plus, check it out for the different ways that you can support the show. You can also join us on Patreon, where we have hundreds of hours of bonus content. You can also support us by supporting our sponsors, or by giving us a 5-star review.
5 stars only, please.
Don't forget to subscribe.
That's right. Now, this is a weekly podcast, and episodes drop on Thursdays. So until next time, look alive, y'all. It's crazy out there.